Yep. I've announced it a couple of times, but obviously there's no hype and hate today. It's Georgia versus Vandy. Georgia's favored by like 30, 31, 32, somewhere in there. Georgia will win huge on the road at Vandy. I don't know if they'll cover the 30. Interesting tidbit. Vandy hasn't scored on Georgia since 2019. Keep in mind they play every year. Now, they didn't play in 2020 because Vandy backed out. But Georgia will win huge on the road at Vandy. They're the worst team in the SEC. All right, Florida on the road at South Carolina. Miami on the road at North Carolina. Those are the two games I want to talk about here. Let's start with the SEC matchup. The Gators, led by Sunbelt Billy, take their traveling circus on the road to Columbia and the world's largest trailer park, Willie Bryce, Willie B, to take on Shane Beamer, that goofball, and the Gamecocks in the Somebody's Gotta Win Bowl here. Man, Florida has had a hard time on the road lately. They've lost 15 of the last 17 on the road. That's abysmal. Sunbelt Billy only has one win on the road in his year and a half now at Florida. Uh, South Carolina's coming off of a bye week. Prior to that, they, of course, lost on the road at South Carolina, so they've got their own issues on the road. Have they lost every road game they've played this year? Yes. South Carolina lost on the road at Georgia, lost on the road at Tennessee, lost a neutral site game in Charlotte to uh, North Carolina. But they do win at home, and this game's in Columbia. Like I mentioned, I think Spencer Rattler's going to have a big game here. Again, a couple extra weeks to prepare. Him and Leggett should put on a show against Florida. And I just don't think Florida offensively on the road can keep up with South Carolina. And it's just getting to the point. Look, nothing is a certainty in college football. Of course, Florida could go on the road and beat South Carolina, right? Southern Cal could pitch a shutout defensively. Now, it's not likely to happen, and we've got years of evidence to support that in the case of Southern Cal, that their defense is likely to not play well and not get a shutout, but it's possible in any given time that can happen. It's possible Florida could go on the road and get a win, but I'm going to have to see it before I believe it. South Carolina's a 2.5-point road favorite. I like South Carolina to win and cover. Now, I do not think South Carolina will be able to run the ball much, if at all, in this game against the Florida defense. Carolina struggles to run the ball against anybody, and Florida defensively, outside of the Kentucky game, has actually been pretty good against the run this year. But I like Spencer Rattler more than Graham Mertz. I like South Carolina at home, which is a big home field advantage for them. Way better than I like Florida on the road. And all this sort of smoke and mirror 3-card Monty shell game bullshit that Billy Napier's doing with the travel schedule this week, leaving a day earlier, getting to Columbia a day earlier, told the team to get extra sleep, getting to the stadium an hour earlier prior to the start of kickoff than they normally do. They're changing up pregame meals, all this just smoke and mirrors shit. In the end, it's the Florida football team and the product they put on the field that's the problem. And I just cannot pick Florida to win a road game against a team in South Carolina that I consider to be fairly equal with Florida right now. I don't think Florida is miles ahead of South Carolina. I don't think South Carolina is miles ahead of Florida. They're two pretty equal teams. It seems like these two teams are fighting over maybe 5th place in the SEC East. I mean, you got Georgia, Kentucky, Tennessee, and probably Mizzou that to me look clearly better than both of these two teams. That's 4 teams right there. One of these teams will be 5th, one of them will be 6th, and Vandy is hanging out in the rear where they normally are. If this game was in the swamp, I'd probably pick Florida to win it, but it's not. It's on the road at Willie B, and I think South Carolina gets the win and covers the 2.5. North Carolina hosting Miami. I don't think there's been a team in the history of college football that's more eager to get back out on the field and play again than Miami. They've got to get the taste and the memory of last week out of their mouth. Now, no matter what they do, we're not going to forget it as fans. At least I can promise you I'm not going to forget it. I'm going to spend a lot of time over the next several years laughing about that Miami loss to Georgia Tech last weekend where Mario Cristobal just made one of the dumbest coaching decisions of all time. And then The Miami defense allowed a 75-yard touchdown drive that took 2 plays and 15 seconds or whatever it was. I'm going to clown Miami to the end of time for that. But the team itself, they need to get back out on the field and play again. They need to put that loss behind them. They need to put the end of that game behind them. Just think about being a Miami player this week. You cannot turn on a college football TV show, a college football YouTube show, a podcast, a radio show, a satellite Sirius XM show, nothing college football related, without hearing people laugh at what happened to you last week if you're a Miami player. You got to be eager to get back out on the field and put that thing behind you. That's great. The problem is you're doing that on the road at North Carolina, who just so happens to be a pretty good team in 2023, led, of course, by all-world quarterback Drake May, who is coming off probably the best game of his season this past week. North Carolina, although not elite defensively, has taken a pretty big step forward on the defensive side of the ball in 2023, at least numbers-wise, compared to what they were doing last year. And I'm going to have to raise my hand and admit I'm a little bit surprised. I thought maybe they should have got rid of Gene Chizik as defensive coordinator after last year. They decided to keep him, and at least so far this season, it looks like it's worked out. Again, not that they're an elite level defense. They don't have the talent for that, but they've made obvious strides forward versus last year. They are also run the ball pretty well, which is a little bit more surprising. They've now got Tez Marshall back at wide receiver after, well, not back. They've got him for the first time. He's that transfer who just recently got approved just prior to last week's game. So North Carolina's capable of scoring a lot of points. Drake May can hurt you with his arm or his legs. And North Carolina's defense better, I think, than most people thought it would be heading into the season. Miami, on the other hand, hard to figure out. That team I saw play against Georgia Tech, that was not the same team I saw play against Texas A&M in week 2. And I know teams change over the course of a season. Injuries happen. Players, come and go. Teams get hot. Teams get cold, whatever. That was a pitiful, pitiful, pitiful performance by Miami against Georgia Tech. I know everybody and their brothers talked about it all week, and I've mentioned it myself. It never should have came down to that at the end. Miami should have had Georgia Tech put away in the second quarter of that game. Miami is infinitely better than Georgia Tech, okay? That was a fluke win by Georgia Tech. No disrespect to Georgia Tech, but, that's just an embarrassing performance from Miami where, for whatever reason, I don't know if Miami's reading their own press clippings, reading their own headlines or what, but Miami's not one of these teams, as good as they are or as good as they have the potential to be. Miami's not so good that they can just roll the ball out on the field on any given Saturday and beat whoever shows up to play them. That is just clearly not the case, as proven last week. Miami has to show up every single week like they've got something to prove, or else they're capable of being beat almost every single week. I do think that Miami will show up prepared to play this game. I do not think we're going to get the Miami that we got last week against Georgia Tech. I don't know that we're going to get the Miami we got week 2 against Texas A&M either, though. That was, at home early in the season. A lot has happened since then. And honestly, I just feel like North Carolina's the better team. They get them at home. It's a primetime game. The North Carolina crowd will be as loud as a North Carolina football crowd can possibly be. They'll be into the game, primetime, undefeated. North Carolina appears like they've got a pretty good shot to get to the ACC title game. They don't have to play Florida State or Louisville in the regular season, the other 2 undefeated ACC teams. Miami's one of the most difficult games remaining on their schedule for North Carolina. If they get past this game, if North Carolina gets past this Miami game, it's hard to imagine North Carolina having more than one conference loss come the end of the year, in which case they would most likely be in the ACC title game. Miami, on the other hand, backs against the wall. They're not out of it yet. They've got a chance to knock off over the next few weeks a couple of these undefeated teams. They play North Carolina on the road this weekend. They play Florida State coming up in a few weeks. So as bad as Miami looked last week, we have to kind of remind ourselves, yeah, you lost to Georgia Tech, but right now that's their only loss. So Miami still has everything to play for that they had before last week's loss to Georgia Tech, which is why I think we're going to get the better version of Miami. I just don't think it'll be enough. I like Tyler Van Dyke, and he looked really good through the first month of the season. Don't know what happened to him on Saturday, multiple interceptions. I probably would have picked North Carolina to win this game, even if Miami didn't lose to Georgia Tech last weekend. I'm definitely going with North Carolina now. North Carolina's a 3-point favorite. I do not think this game will be a blowout. I do not think, like I've said, we're going to get the sort of low-end version of Miami, the low-energy, low-effort version of Miami that played at home against Georgia Tech this past weekend. I think we will get a much better version of Miami, but I think North Carolina is up to the task. So in these two games, South Carolina hosting Florida, North Carolina hosting Miami, I'm going with both home teams. Give me the Gamecocks to cover the 2.5, and give me the Tarheels to cover the 3-pointer. And Georgia by 100. Have a good morning.